My name is Randy. I'm going to be demonstrating how to throw pottery. So here we go. To begin with, I'll take a couple of fingers of water and make an S on my wheel and smack my clay down. And then take my thumbs and go around like this to give it a little bit of extra adhesion. And of course, water is my friend, so I want lots of water on here. Even though I'm left-handed, I'm throwing on a right-handed wheel. The wheel is turning counterclockwise, and I'm going to be throwing between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock on the wheel. If I threw on the other side on the left-handed wheel, the wheel would be fighting me. So I have to make sure that my black switch is in the right place and that my light is on, etc. One of the classic ways to center is to put both hands on my sides, put my wrists together, push in horizontally and toward 12 o'clock at the same time with a loaded sponge. So here I go. There we go. One of the things that I want to make sure I've done is have my elbows on the insides of my thighs when I do this. This clay is kind of stiff, so I can collar it and cone it up. This is another technique. Some people call it wedging on the wheel. It helps get rid of some of the stiffness. There we go. Now I'm going to be losing about 1/8 to 1/4 of a pound in slip. And that's just the nature of the beast. That's just what happens when we do this. So I'm expecting that to happen. So there are many different ways to do the same thing. Another way that people phrase that is that there are many different paths to the same mountain summit. What you just saw me do was one way to center clay on the wheel. Another way is my elbow is at 4 o'clock, my wrist is hyperextended toward 6 o'clock, and I'm pointing toward 10 o'clock. My left hand is pressing down. That is a second way that people can center. And I'm using my knee as a lever in order to do that. A third way is karate chop. And of course, a variation on that is fist over hand. So, there are 4 different ways that you can center on the wheel. And you get to pick the one that works the best for you, because if you're doing something that's a bit unorthodox, but you're having fun, oh God forbid you're having fun, and you're enjoying yourself and you're producing what you want, but you're doing it in a way that might not be traditional, then you're doing it the best way and the correct way for you. And if somebody comes up and tells you that you're doing it wrong, they basically have a bunch of pottery tools stuck up their butts that they need to remove. So, keeping that in mind, have fun with what you're doing and enjoy it. And hopefully you can have some success in making coffee mugs or whatever you're going to be making, plates, bowls, etc. So the next thing I want to do is open up the top and sink down. One of the classic ways that you can do that is to turn your ball of clay into a clock, and I have my 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock meridian, my 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock meridian. I'm going to put both thumbs on either side of 6 o'clock. I do not want to go too far above that 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock meridian. I want to hug that axis mundi. I want to keep my thumbs flat and arc down. I do not want to hyperextend my thumbs, because that's kind of like drilling a well in the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing good ever came of it. It's an advanced move for much softer clays. So I would suggest, if you're a beginner potter, not to do that, to keep your thumbs flat. And here we go. As my thumbs arc down, I create a wide dish. As I make a dish, I fill it with water. So that's one way to open up the top and sink down. A second way is right hand supports while left hand presses at 6 o'clock. That's another way you can do it. One of my favorites is 4 to 6 fingers on the sponge. I press at 6 o'clock, pull horizontally towards 6 o'clock, let the sponge slip over the lip and down the side. Once again, press at 6 o'clock, push horizontally towards 6 o'clock, slip over the lip and down the side. One of the classic cardinal rules in throwing pottery is that you approach slowly. You do whatever you're doing very slowly. And you retreat slowly. Pottery is not a sprint. It's not a jog. It's not a walk in the park. It's not even a baby crawl. It's a snail crawl. You know, it's glacially slow. It should be. When you see other potters online or on YouTube who can throw, you know, huge, tall Grecian vases in 2 or 3 pulls, and they're doing it in less than a minute, those videos are being sped up, and you don't know what kind of clay that they're working with. You don't know that they have been specializing in that particular form since they were 6 years old and they're 57. And that's the only thing that they make. There's a lot of factors that are not being shared with you on YouTube. But you're seeing something wonderful, of course, but remember there's a lot of editing that goes on with that. So don't be discouraged. I also tell my students to, I encourage them in fact to take a look at YouTube videos to see how other people solve the same kind of problem, which is throwing pottery. So, I'm going to continue. There we go. Now, I'm going to check the bottom to see how thick it is. I usually put my finger just ever so gently on the base and lift up. I want half a needle's length for the thickness of my bottom. As a beginner, this is going to save you a lot, because if you have half a needle's length for the thickness of your bottom and you make a mistake, well, guess what? You've got a little bit of extra to fix the mistake. But if you start here and you make a mistake, you just ran out of options really quickly. So when you become more advanced, you can play with the thickness of your base and determine what's more comfortable for you. Personally, I'm more of an enthusiast for Asian arts and Japanese arts, so I like a nice, high, classic Japanese foot. When I do that, I will usually have my finger is going to be the height of my foot, and the space between my 2 fingers is the actual there we are, is the actual thickness of the base of my piece. Okay. So now that I've discovered how deep my base is, I'm going to continue to form the bottom. So I take my sponge. One way that I can do that is take my sponge. My goal is a flat bottom with a rounded inner corner. So I can take my sponge and do that. It's very fun. Very easy to do. I can, excuse me, I can take my fingers and do the same thing with my thumb. One of my favorites, once again, is I will make a tiny little dot right in the center. I'm going to take my half moon rib. This corner has to hit that dot. This corner is going to hit first. This edge has to be not only on the 3 o'clock meridian, but I want to make sure that it is flat. This edge is at 6 o'clock, but it's tilted at a 45-degree angle. This corner is going to touch first. I understand that, so I'm going to commit and press. So here I go. And lift up gently. Flat corner, rounded. Or flat edged bottom, rounded inner corner. So there I go. So ribs are wonderful because they can do a whole lot for you. They can set the lip of a plate. They can, of course, create the curve of your bowl. They can make the flat edge of your plate. They can do all sorts of things. So make sure that when you're looking in pottery magazines, grab as many different kinds of ribs as possible because they're really worth it. So the next thing I'm going to do, now that I've made my bottom nice and finished, I can start messing with my walls. One of the classic ways that I did that when I was in college is I locked my fingers together and threw with my fingers at about 3 o'clock. Like so. Notice that my forearms are resting on my thighs. This clamp is difficult to manage, even for advanced potters. This clamp is better. This clamp is the best because I'm creating a neural connection between my fingers that allows me to gauge the amount of thickness of clay between my two fingers. So I can throw like this. This is one way that you can throw. It's pretty classic. I can also use the sponge on the outside. I want to keep my fingers apart in space before I re-engage. I can use my sponge on the inside. I can support the entire wall on the outside and throw with the fingers. So there are many different ways to pull up a wall. That was one pull. I've done 4 so far. So here's one of my favorites is I put my right thumb on top. Here's the bunny hole. Close the door, 4 bunnies inside. That's the way I remember it. It's basically my thumbs are acting as the hinge point. My 4 fingers are lifting from the inside and my index finger is lifting from the outside. So one of my favorite ways to do this, I have Mark Peterson to thank for this. He taught me how to do this particular technique a while back, and I have used it ever since. I usually will create a notch underneath because I want my clay to go into the wall rather than fanning out like Mount Fuji. So, another cardinal rule to remember is that the higher your walls become, the slower your wheel must turn. Because if you don't, your piece is going to escape and become ruined because, of centripetal force. So I want to make sure to keep my fingers apart in space as I'm lifting. And I don't want to lift a wall specifically for stiffer clays, especially the higher cone, this is a cone 10 clay, which means that this will be fired at 2,350 degrees. It's a high-fired stoneware. This particular clay is called dark brown. It's wonderful. When I am lifting my wall, I want to lift as gradually as possible. I don't want to do this in 3 or 4 pulls. I'm very content myself with lifting a wall in 15, 20, 30, 40 pulls. That's perfectly fine. Because once again, this is not a quick project. This should be a gradual, slow project. And it's a very relaxing thing to do also. So if my outside hand reaches the top before my inside hand, the piece curves in. If my inside hand reaches the top. Before my outside hand, the piece flares out. And I could snake up a wall like that pretty easily, because the thing you need to remember and understand is that if you can master the cylinder, the wheel is at your command. You cannot escape the cylinder, especially because you're throwing on the wheel. Everything that you throw on the wheel is a variation on a cylinder. A plate is a cylinder with a really wide base and a really short wall. Of course, you've got coffee mugs, you've got bottle forms, bowls, all sorts of things, which are basically variations on the cylinder. So if you can master a simple, straight wall cylinder, you can pretty much do anything you want on the wheel and have a lot of fun doing it. We have about a 13 to 17% shrinkage rate on this particular kiln. That happens during the glaze firing, of course. So another thing that I will advise people to do is that if they're going to throw something and they know what the shrinkage rate is, make your stuff uncomfortably large at this stage. Oh, I can't possibly drink that much coffee. Oh, that's a lot for an ice cream bowl. Of course, for me, there's no such thing. But you want to make your stuff very large so that it'll shrink to just the right size during the glaze firing. If you make your stuff just the right size at this stage of the game, it will shrink smaller than what you had expected to begin with. And that includes the thickness of the walls. Another guideline, it's not a hard, fast rule, but it's something to think about, is that the thickness of your walls will also shrink. So you want to think about, maybe roughly speaking, the width of your little pinky fingernail as the width of your walls, because even that will shrink down to just the right size as well. So I'm doing a pretty good, halfway decent cylinder. I want to make sure that when I pull up, my fingers always start in that lower inner corner, and my outer hand always starts with the knuckle dragging on the wheel. So I'm going to do this on the side so you guys can see, so that when I come up, I can gauge that my walls are the same thickness from the very base to the very top. That is an unseen mark of quality that we all recognize and that we all kind of look for when we're evaluating whether we want to buy this piece in the store or in the farmer's market or what have you, or not. If the walls are always the same thickness, if the piece is somewhat light when you lift it up, and it feels like you're not really lifting anything, then you'll most likely be willing to pay what the person is asking for it. So this is a fairly decent, nice, standard cylinder. I can arch it out into a bowl. I can do that with my fingers. I can do it with my sponge. Once again, I'm slowing that wheel down. Okay, this would be considered a winter style bowl. I can also use, of course, my half moon rib. I'm going to put this edge in that lower inner corner on its side like this, not coming at it perpendicular, but I'm going to put it in an angle and just simply tilt. So here I go with that. There we go. So that's very nice. I like that. People have a tendency, if it's going to be a Japanese tea bowl, there's a thing called the well on the inside, which is a little indentation. It's rather shallow. You can make it with your finger, or you can also just do a spiral. That looks pretty good. The next thing I want to do is I want to work on my lip. I also do not want standing water on the inside of my piece. If that occurs, you want to get it out of there because it will have a tendency to create an S-crack at a later time because the clay, it contains more moisture and more water because of that standing water than other parts of the piece, and it'll dry slower and it'll create tension and it'll create that S-crack. So I'm going to set my lip. One way I can do that is to put both fingers on either side and simply push down with my finger. That's one way I can set my lip. I can also simply round it off with my sponge. And this is a standard symmetrical bowl. I've got my potter's knife. It has a blade on one side and a spoon on the other. I'll take my, pretend this is at 6 o'clock, which is over here. I'm going to take my spoon, scrape clay so I don't have to get rid of it at a later time. Then I'm going to simply take my needle tool and make a little divot. Now I usually do this at 6 o'clock where it's a little easier. And that divot indent is so that I can have a little bit of an easier time cutting it off the wheel. So another thing I want to do is I could leave the bowl just as it is. Wonderful, symmetrical, classic bowl. One of the things that I really enjoyed though is the asymmetricality of Japanese tea bowls and that slapdash unique quality that they have depending on the style of the bowl. One way that I can achieve that is to take my knuckle and my fingers and run it up very quickly and create a groove or an indent like so. Whoops! Wow, I got most of that, didn't I? Never mind, I screwed that up. Sorry, I screwed up the first time, but it happens to every potter. It's just that you got to see that on YouTube, so not too bad. But anyway, there's a couple of rings in there that I was able to throw. So, but as in life, you get it just to that right point, and then it screws up. So yeah, that's kind of par for the course. But anyway, I'm gonna do this. I need to grab a wire and just simply cut through. I'm going to make sure that there's a loaded sponge between myself and the piece. And then I've got 4 fingers on the wire. I can wrap up a couple of times if I want. I want to make sure that my thumbs remain on the wheel at all times and that my wire is tight. I'm cutting away from me, of course. And then I release the wire way over here. You can either undo your troughs and slide it or lift it with your fingers. Personally, I like to use lifters. So whatever way works the best for you is perfectly fine to remove the piece from the wheel. So that should be it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will try again at a later time to show you how I trim. But I hope you enjoyed it. Oh, one of the things I kind of like to do also is warp the form a little bit, because symmetricality is fine, but asymmetricality is better for me. So I'm purposefully altering the form so that it fits my hands when I'm drinking from it. And I kind of like it that way. I guess we're all a little asymmetrical to begin with, so. There, yay! Here, I'm gonna spin it really slowly so you can see. So that's not too bad. There you go. Bye. I'll see you later.